I want to share something with you, and I want you to think when I show you this image. And I want you to think about the emotions, the first things that come to mind when I show you this image. Okay, and then we're going to discuss that. I saw this on Instagram a few days ago, and of course I copied the image and wanted to share it here. And I can tell you that the initial thoughts that went through my head, being that there was nothing that went with the image, nothing. I mean, this is what I had to look at, and so therefore, in my very natural human sense, immediately went to all possibilities, the worst possibilities. That's what I thought was going on in the image because it had no context. It provided no additional information, no backstory, um, which for humans, it's sort of interesting how you see images like this, and sort of the first things that your brain wants to move to is the most horrible things for some reason. When in reality, what we're looking at is a puppy that got into a jar of strawberry or raspberry jelly and ate it all. And as a result, fell into a sugar coma. That's your image on the left. And then, of course, the owner holding the dog up after the fact. But that's not what it looks like. It looks like a bloody crime scene, and it looks like, that somebody had purposely injured the dog or killed the dog. And I don't know if those are the things that went through your mind initially, being that you were left with no information to come to any other conclusion. Now, I don't know if that's sort of a glass half empty kind of a perspective. Some of you might have gone, oh, well, got into something. I don't know. I'd be interested in your feedback on that to sort of, because I think it's an interesting discussion, an interesting sort of experiment in understanding how humans think. But that exercise made me think about an experience I had yesterday, and it happened to be with my own child's IEP meeting, where we sat down as a team to discuss her functional behavior analysis and develop a behavior intervention plan, being that we had just moved into a new school system. And this new school system, top notch in the state where we live, but I can tell you that they've done everything wrong procedurally along the way, everything wrong. And what I didn't want to do, and I haven't done, I guess I had to do it recently, but I don't announce who I am or what I do. I am James Galini, Ava Galini's father, and I don't want to complicate things by asserting my knowledge in this area, being that I sort of understand how everything works, and I understand how poorly people are trained in these laws, and so I have a lot of patience when it comes to this process, understanding that the only way, the best way to cure ignorance is with education and with just training people and using these opportunities as an advocate for my child to bring people up to a level of understanding on how to do things effectively. As long as it doesn't damage my kid, I'm a little more patient than I am with my own clients, even, because I understand that I'm looking at a long-term result. And sometimes in order for me to get there, I've got to sit there and chill for a couple months in order to work through the goals that we need to work through. And balance that with the need to have a positive IEP team experience, which is exactly what we do with every possible effort when we handle all of your cases. It's something that's very, very important to me, and something I instill in the attorneys that work with me, is that we are very mindful of maintaining and attempting to maintain a good relationship with your IEP team, being that they're the ones that have to implement these changes. And the entire point of raising the bar and starting Ask a Special Ed Attorney, the same purpose, guys. If I can sit there and equip people with better information, a better strategy and approach to take to your IEP team to have good IEP meetings, to understand how to navigate this process, then everybody is benefiting. Your education staff, the educators that are on this page, the administrators are on this page, and parents. This does not, it was never designed to be a hostile process. It was never designed that way. But you need mechanisms in those situations to where there's disagreement. And that's where somebody like me comes in. But I look at myself more as a fix-it person, more of a consultant than some adversarial attorney, lopping heads off, though that is a function of my job. And there are instances to where that is necessary. But most of the time, I'm proud to say, most of the time, it is a collaborative process to try to better the process and try to better the system and the programs for our kids. But I can tell you in this meeting yesterday, and what impressed me was the psychologist, the school psychologist that was leading the meeting, had to, I'm not going to say had to, but finally came out and admitted that they had never done it this way. They'd always used the state-provided forms. They'd always just checked the boxes. Nobody had ever trained them to do it the way that I was asking them to do it. And, they said, look, this is an education for all of us. We are going to do it better because of this experience. Now we understand this all makes sense. And, I'm not doing that to toot my horn by any means, but I appreciated the honesty. That's rare. And I think that is one of those things that is so beneficial to this process, is when parents and educators are able to sit there and say, I don't know everything. We can do it better. What can we do? And the entire point of having IEP meetings and the opportunity to have multiple IEP meetings during the school year, and the point that we have goals developed here to be achieved here, and we have all this time in between to where we're having opportunities to test what we're doing. If it's not working, change it before you get to this point, or you get to this point. Sorry. This point of goal, progression. You don't sit there and develop a goal and then whatever the services that you have and just stick with it because you're going, well, I don't want the parents to know that we don't know what we're doing, or we have these programs that aren't working. That's not how we solve these problems. We solve these problems by acknowledging that we don't know everything. We don't have the information. We don't have the necessary backdrop. We don't have the context. And I can tell you that a lot of the problems in most of the cases that I deal with and that we deal with as a Galini group is that we review these records, and so many times the IEPs historically read differently. And they read differently because different hands put their work into it. And, I acknowledge that a lot of our case managers that are putting the drafts together for these IEPs, they're overworked. They're trying to do it in a hurry. Sometimes they don't know the child as much as they should. And some of the best IEPs that end up being developed are the ones where the child has a consistent same teacher for a few school years. These things are supposed to build on one another. The child is who the child is. And we need that full story of who the child is, the full context, in order to be able to develop the right kind of services and goals, understanding the deficits. That's the point of the evaluations, thorough evaluations, so that we can achieve full context, so the team understands what they're looking at. The data collection is so incredibly important. And you can do simple data collection, guys. It doesn't have to be complex. But you need that information because it provides context for the team. And in this particular situation yesterday, when I was asking where this information came from, because we had a behavior analyst doing the observations, but for some reason, the behavior analyst turned the information over to the psychologist. The psychologist took that information, put it into a behavior plan, sort of melded an FBA and a BIP together, which is not appropriate. And it was on the state form, which didn't tell It just provided boxes, but it didn't tell the full story of what was going on. My daughter's only been going to school a couple times a week for 2.5 hours because we're not going to send her until the staff is trained to competency on her program. That's just how we've always done it. I'm a patient person. I understand that we're knocking on the door of December. I get that. But I can tell you, my daughter's going to make rapid progress, and she's making progress now. But she's happy. The staff is happy, and they're appreciative that we're sort of slow rolling this and not forcing it. And we have the ability to do that. I mean, my wife homeschools our boys, so we do have the ability to sit there and not knee-jerk about what needs to occur. It's not the case for a lot of families, and I get that. But in this situation, we weren't going to rush it. But to have the BCBA taking the data, doing observations for the few days that, scheduled with the times that the BCBA was available in order to conduct proper observations. But that information, so the BCBA putting it into a functional behavior analysis, or an FBA, and a functional behavior assessment, the data was transferred over to the psychologist so the school could put a BIP together based upon what her observations. So they didn't do any observations themselves as far as the psychologist. But that was the process that they have within the school system. Not the correct process. I'm not saying it was wrong, but what I'm saying is that your chances of getting it wrong are a hell of a lot higher in that kind of situation than having the consistency of having a behavior analyst, put that information together and then encase it into a BIP to where you have the team making adjustments as needed. That isn't what happened here. So when I started posing questions about the state form, well, that's the form we have. And I said, well, we don't have to use the state form. That's just there if you need it. But to truly individualize the behavior intervention plan, a good one, an appropriate one, by and large, you can't use the state-provided form that has just the bubbles that you check because it doesn't encapsulate and tell the story of my daughter. It doesn't sit there and explain why she does what she does with regards to her elopement, which she only does because she likes to explore. And this is a new setting for her. And once she's familiar with where everything is, she won't do that anymore. But we know that. But when you're putting it on bubbles and, explaining that these are target behaviors, it doesn't explain anything other than that. And that's where context, just like the puppy, is so important as to why things occur. And it didn't tell that story. And so the problem or the concern that I had is that my daughter requires targeted aid support during the day. But during the check mark, the level of her problem behaviors was, on their scale to 1 to 5, which also doesn't make any sense. It's not defined. 5 being the worst, 1 being the least. They pegged my daughter at a 2. And so without the necessary backdrop information to explain how many minutes she was actually observed, how many days a week, it gives a false impression to somebody that doesn't understand and doesn't have the proper context because they don't have all the information. Looking at this sheet as, let's say, an administrator deciding where the resources need to be provided is going to look at that and naturally go, you know what, why are we giving targeted aid support to a kid that, is problem behaviors at 2? But her problem behaviors are a 2 because while the observations are going on, the staff are properly supported and they are being trained in real time, because the BCBA is there and we're following the process as it needs to be followed. Otherwise, my daughter would be a 5 or a 4 right in there. And that's why we don't throw her out there to sort of experiment. That's just, you don't have to do that. This can be a very proactive process, and we can sit there and build a structure of success far in advance of behaviors being manifested. And so many schools don't do it that way. They're reactionary in how they use behavior analysts, and they're reactionary in how they address behavior. Instead of building a structure because we understand the child. My wife and I understand our daughter. We came into a new school system, but we have all of the data that we had the BCBAs going back years provide this information to our new school system so that they had all of the information historically on her behaviors. Some of which she doesn't engage in anymore, but it doesn't matter because she has in the past engaged in those. If she is not taught or approached in an appropriate manner, she may engage in those behaviors. Why? It's a form of communication for her. It's an outlet for her frustration and her inability or her limited ability to communicate her wants and needs. Also, those of us in normal land that have the ability to delay gratification, the things we want, we can sit there and delay it, have patience, we work for 2 weeks, we get a paycheck. We delay our gratification for those things that we're working for. With somebody like my daughter, her ability to delay gratification is greatly reduced. And some of my clients, it's got to be almost immediate. But these are all things that if you envelop the IEP team with the right context, with the right information, and have it well in advance of implementation, then you have such a lower risk of having problem behaviors, extreme problem behaviors, for example, pop up to where, you have a frustrated staff, you have teachers wanting to leave, you have a stigma that's then attached to the child, all of it could have been avoided with proper context, with proper information, with historical information. That's why when you're developing your IEP, that student profile section, the first beginning pages that explain who your child is so important. And you as a parent, especially right now when we have a huge problem with staffing within our public schools, we can be a partner with our educators by helping really tell the story of our children historically. All the positives, the negatives, the things that they have engaged in as far as problem behaviors or deficits or needs historically in other school years. Tell the story of your child in the form of a narrative. Pass that on to your case manager. You can even ask to have that in the little parent section. And the parent section may be 1 or 2 pages, but it tells the story for your child. Why is that important? It is so incredibly important, guys, because you're supposed to be designing these IEPs so that if tomorrow you have a brand new staff that picks up this IEP, doesn't know it from anything else, never met your child, they should be able to read this IEP and have the information be clear enough to where they understand who your child is and what your child's deficits are, what their needs are, and how they need to approach implementation of the goals through the services. That's our target. Proper context, the backstory. I did not want an administrator looking at this sheet without the proper information and then make decisions that then potentially would cause and trigger problems on the IEP team because we didn't do a good enough job in creating an FBA that provided the necessary data and information that went into why my daughter is a level 1 or a level 2, with low problem behaviors. That's what we're trying to avoid. So we tabled the meeting, and they're going to go back to the drawing board, and they're going to do it in the way that they need to do it. And everybody agreed. They were like, well, that makes sense. They had just never done it that way. It wasn't that they were trying to screw anybody over honestly, guys, I cannot tell you how many problems in our world stem from ignorance. And that it shouldn't be taken offense. I mean, I can tell you that I'm sure that there's many things in this world that I'm absolutely ignorant to. And there's many areas where would even be considered an expert. But that field of my expertise is narrow. Now, I would hope that I research and I do enough reading and asking of questions that, I'm competent to a level but also acknowledging I'm not an expert and I shouldn't be traipsing into areas where I'm not. It doesn't mean that I can't ask questions and I can't pose questions. That's my job as an attorney. And you better come to me with a good answer. And I don't care who you are, because I fight government. That's what I do. So all these things that you see me posting, I do incredible amount of research. Doesn't mean I'm an expert in the area, but it does mean that I will pose questions. And if you cannot come to me with solid answers to back up what it is that you're requesting, demanding, or doing, then I'm sorry. And that is typically what I have found in the time that I've been doing this, is that government, because it has the power to back it up, will frequently hide its mistakes using aggression, force, mandates. You will do what I say. See, those of us who live out in normal land, to where there's accountability and consequences to our decisions, we can't function like that. We can't function using force because we don't have that ability to use force. Threat of action, threat of arrest, threat of being charged, threat of being denied access to a campus. Being access, there is a power differential. And I can tell you that's where government hides its ignorance, is behind the threats and the use of force and the use of mandates. If your ideas are so good, then you don't need those, because people will understand. Common sense will prevail. But if the common sense isn't there, and you're making decisions based upon and rooted in fear, and fear is nothing but a byproduct of ignorance, and I am legit on that, guys. Fear is a byproduct of ignorance. Those of you that are caught up into the fear of COVID, for example, it's rooted in ignorance, guys. You're listening to the fear porn being pumped out by the mainstream media, who have their own motivations. Corporate media owned by 5 big multinational corporations driving a narrative. A government pushing mandates that don't make any sense. But they're doing it through fear and the use of fear. That is rooted and is a byproduct of ignorance. Those with common sense look at that and it doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, why doesn't it make sense? And then it pushes you to make additional researches and going outside of the normal mainstream narrative that's out there, to sit there and find and search for alternative resources. And it's out there, guys. That information's out there. But that's what cures ignorance. And by curing ignorance, you cure your fear. That is exactly what is the root behind racism, xenophobia. I don't care what it is. You name all those little things that make us human. And when I say things that make us humans, the guys, we're the capable of being the best, of doing magical, wonderful things, but we're also very capable of doing the most evil things. And that's each one of us individually. Every day I get a choice whether I'm going to be a good person or I'm not going to be a good person. Whether I'm going to take responsibility for myself and do the necessary research to make good choices for myself and for my family, and not rely upon information from other people that may have a motive to steer me and to sit there and manipulate me and prey upon my ignorance because I've chosen not to do the necessary research or ask the necessary questions or scrutinize what it is that people are doing. That goes to your IEP team, that goes to your government officials, that goes to your religions. I don't care what it is, guys. You do not hand over your personal decision making to other people without checking the boxes, getting proper context, understanding the backstory. Don't be used and manipulated. I don't care if that's on your IEP team. I don't care if that's a citizen in your community. Do not be manipulated. Get the back information. Get the proper context. Or, if you don't, you'll be left making stupid posts, being outraged about what you see, and then being embarrassed later when somebody says it's jelly. It's just jelly. Context. It is so incredibly important in all aspects of our life. It destroys ignorance, and fear is a byproduct of ignorance.